Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving headfirst into the world of distributed ledger technology.
DLT?
DLT, right? We're going way beyond Bitcoin here, folks.
Absolutely.
And really trying to grapple with some of the core economics behind it all.
For sure.
We wanted to understand, like, why does this decentralization thing even matter?
Yeah.
What makes a ledger system truly, like, robust, something that can stand the test of time?
Right, right.
Our guide for this deep dive is a paper from the Journal of Financial Economics.
Okay.
It's called Distributed Ledgers and the Governance of Money.
Interesting.
And get ready, folks, because this one, it really throws some curveballs at you, makes you rethink some basic assumptions.
It does.
Like, can we actually have money without those big institutions?
Yeah, without the banks, the governments, all
Right, exactly. Like, is trustless money even a thing?
a big question.
And is decentralization always the best way to go?
Maybe not.
Right, it really gets you thinking.
It challenges some of those deep-seated beliefs we have about trust in economics.
Yeah.
I mean, we've relied on institutions for so long for financial transactions.
Yeah.
But DLT, it might just flip that on its head.
Really turn things upside down.
It builds trust into the tech itself, not a single entity.
Huh. So it's not about a new type of money per se.
Yeah.
It's like rethinking the whole foundation of how our financial world works.
Yeah, changing the game entirely.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's start with something we're all familiar with.
Money.
Good old money.
Yeah, exactly. The paper reminds us that money, throughout history, has always been a form of memory, I guess.
Memory.
Like, think about it, those clay pots, metal coins, banknotes.
I see.
They all tracked past transactions, right? Who owed what to whom.
Keeping a record.
Right. And DLT, it kind of takes that concept and launches it into hyperdrive.
Okay.
It's like creating this universal transaction record, potentially accessible to everyone.
A shared history of every financial interaction. Yeah, exactly. And that's where blockchain comes in.
Ah, the famous blockchain.
So instead of, one central authority controlling the record,
Right.
picture a network of computers, each with an identical copy of the ledger.
So everyone has the same information.
Yeah, and every new transaction is verified and added through this process called consensus.
Consensus, got to make sure everyone agrees.
Right, that's key. It makes sure everyone's on the same page about what's actually true.
But there are different ways to achieve that consensus,
Different flavors of decentralization.
Exactly. Think of it like setting the rules for your own digital currency.
Okay, I like that.
First, you decide who gets to play.
Okay.
That's permission versus permissionless systems.
So like a private club versus a public park.
Exactly. Then you decide, are we using secret identities or is everyone known?
So anonymous versus identified.
You got it. And each choice, it has huge implications for how the whole system operates.
And who holds the power?
Absolutely.
So we've got all these different flavors of decentralization, but who's actually in charge? Like, who are the guardians of this ledger, making sure everything stays accurate?
That's where the validators come in.
Validators.
They're the ones verifying transactions, keeping everyone honest.
Okay, but here's where I get a little skeptical.
Go on.
Like, if I were a validator, why would I even bother?
Yeah.
Especially if it's, costly, time-consuming.
It's a valid point.
What's to stop me from just, like, manipulating the system for my own game?
Right. That's the dilemma of decentralization.
Yeah.
How do we guarantee honesty when everyone has the power to potentially cheat?
Right.
The paper highlights two big hurdles.
Okay.
First, how do we properly reward validators for their effort? So they don't even think about falsifying records.
That'd be worth their while, right?
Exactly. If the reward isn't there, why would anyone bother verifying anything?
Makes sense.
And then there's the double spending problem.
Right, like spending the same digital coin twice.
Exactly. The system needs a way to catch that, to make sure everyone's on the same page about what's been spent.
So it's like having referees in a game.
I like that analogy.
You need those impartial judges, those who are motivated to make the right call.
For sure.
But in this case, like, who's paying those refs?
Yeah.
And how do we know they won't be bribed?
That's where intertemporal incentives come into play.
Intertemporal incentives. It sounds complicated.
It's not that bad.
Okay.
It's about how much validators value future rewards over immediate gains.
So, like, thinking long-term versus short-term?
You got it.
But here's what throws me for a loop. The paper suggests that if validators are really in it for the long haul,
Okay.
like they really value those future rewards,
Right.
a centralized system with just one super reliable validator might actually be best.
Interesting, right?
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive. Like, why would we go back to a single authority after all this talk of decentralization?
Well, it's all about balancing security and redundancy. Imagine this one validator has so much invested in the system.
Okay.
They'd lose a fortune if they messed up.
So they're basically incorruptible.
Pretty much.
But that only works if you have complete trust in that one validator.
That's the catch.
It's like putting all your eggs in one very, very well-guarded basket.
You hit the nail on the head. And that leads us to the big question. When does decentralization actually make more sense?
Yeah, when do we need to spread that power around?
It's all about those intertemporal incentives again.
Okay.
If validators are easily tempted by those quick wins.
So more short-sighted.
Yeah, if they're focused on the immediate gains, then decentralization becomes much more appealing.
Even though it's more complex, more expensive to set up.
Even then,
Yeah.
it all comes down to mitigating that risk of corruption.
Right.
With one validator, it's a single point of failure.
Okay.
They get compromised, the whole system goes down.
Makes sense.
Decentralization makes it much harder to manipulate things.
Okay.
Because no single person holds all the cards.
So it's like that old saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Exactly.
By spreading the power, you're also spreading the risk.
All right. And that brings us to this intriguing idea of a stakeholder economy.
A stakeholder economy.
Yeah, where the people using the ledger, those making the transactions, they become the validators themselves.
So instead of this separate group of validators, everyone's involved in keeping the system honest.
It's like a self-governing community.
Okay.
The paper calls this internal validation.
Okay.
And it's super robust because those validators are directly invested in the system's success.
So if I'm constantly using the system,
Yeah.
I'm going to be extra motivated to make sure it works properly.
Precisely. It benefits you directly.
It's like homeowners taking care of their own neighborhood, right?
Exactly. They have a stake in keeping things safe and functional.
And this ties into that whole proof of stake thing in cryptocurrencies, right?
It does.
Where validators put up some of their own coins as collateral.
You got it.
So they have skin in the game. They're less likely to misbehave.
Right. The cost of becoming a validator, it acts as a deterrent against bad behavior.
Interesting.
Now, the paper doesn't stop there.
Oh, there's more?
Oh, yeah. It dives into this concept of global games to model how validators make decisions.
Global games, like are they playing video games or something?
Not quite.
Okay.
Think of it like a high-stakes poker game where each validator is trying to predict everyone else's moves,
Okay.
but they don't have all the information.
So it's all about strategy, weighing the risks.
Exactly.
Even with everyone supposedly honest.
Yeah.
Perfect coordination isn't guaranteed.
Right. There's always a chance for errors, disagreements, or just technical issues.
Things happen.
They do, and that's why the paper suggests using supermajority rules.
Supermajority rules.
Yeah, where you only need a certain percentage of validators to agree.
Okay.
It makes the system more flexible, more resilient.
Like a safety net, in case a few validators go offline or see things differently.
Exactly. And the best part is, the optimal threshold, it's not fixed.
Okay.
It depends on a bunch of factors, like the number of validators, how big the transactions are, and those intertemporal incentives we talked about.
So there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Nope, it's all about finding the right balance for each specific situation.
And this brings us to the challenge of connecting the digital world of the ledger with, well, real-world transactions.
The Oracle problem.
Right. Like, we need a way to give our digital ledger eyes and ears in the real world.
And that's where validators play a crucial role.
Okay.
They act as those oracles, confirming the validity of real-world events.
So it's not enough to just have a secure ledger.
No.
You need trustworthy sources of real-world information as well.
Absolutely.
Now, the paper gets really interesting in Proposition 5, where it starts to paint a picture.
Okay.
Imagine a spectrum.
I'm with you.
On one end, you have a single, all-powerful validator.
Centralized.
And on the other, you have a fully distributed system where everyone participates.
Total decentralization.
And in between, you have all these different shades of gray.
Right.
The paper lays out 4 scenarios, showing how the ideal system design changes based on things like validator incentives, the size of the transactions, and the number of validators.
It's like a roadmap for navigating the complexities of this whole DLT world.
Yeah, and it's not just theory.
No.
These are practical insights for building and understanding these systems.
Absolutely.
It's incredible how we've gone from these centralized systems
Yeah.
to a world where everyone might have a say in how things are run.
It's a paradigm shift.
And it underscores that DLT isn't just about the tech.
It's not.
It's about governance, about aligning incentives to create a sustainable balance of power.
For sure.
But before we dive into those 4 scenarios,
Okay.
let's shift gears for a moment and explore this idea of competing ledgers.
Competing ledgers. Now things are getting interesting.
I know, right? Just imagine a future where you can choose from all these different DLT systems.
A marketplace of options.
Exactly. Each one catering to different needs.
Some prioritizing security, others speed, others privacy.
Like choosing between different social media platforms,
Yeah.
each with its own pros and cons.
It's like that, but for your financial life.
This is where my mind starts to race with possibilities.
It's a marketplace of options, yeah. Each one with its own strengths and weaknesses. Some might be super secure, others might be really fast or cheap, or even focused on privacy.
So instead of one ledger to rule them all, it's more like an ecosystem, like a financial ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly, with different species of ledgers, all competing and evolving.
Survival of the fittest, but for financial tech.
Right, and that competition, it can drive some serious innovation, you know?
So ledgers that don't keep up with what users want, they might just go extinct.
They could get outcompeted by something better, more efficient, or just more user-friendly.
It's like natural selection in action.
It is a constant pressure to adapt and improve.
But wouldn't all these different ledgers create like a huge mess?
It's a valid concern.
Like, how would they all work together? Would we need some kind of central system to manage them all?
That's a big question, and it's something that needs a lot more research.
Yeah.
But we might see these bridge technologies emerge, you know?
Bridges.
Yeah, ways to
Okay.
connect these different ledgers so you can move value or information between them smoothly.
So I could take my digital assets from one ledger and transfer them to another without any problems.
That's the idea, seamless interoperability.
That's pretty cool.
We might even see meta ledgers develop, systems that sit on top of all these other ledgers.
Meta ledgers. Like a ledger of ledgers.
Yeah, they would track and manage transactions across multiple underlying systems.
Whoa, that's like building a whole new layer on top of our current financial system.
It is, and it highlights the real potential of DLT. You know, we're not just talking about replacing what we have, we're talking about creating entirely new possibilities.
But with all this competition, how do we make sure it's a fair game?
That's a crucial point.
Like, what's to stop big players from just crushing the little guys or taking advantage of users?
That's where regulation and governance come in.
Yeah, we need some rules of the road, right?
We need to balance this amazing innovation with consumer protection, making sure the competition is fair and that no one gets too much power.
So it's not just about the tech itself.
Yeah.
It's about setting up the right environment for it to thrive.
Exactly, creating a level playing field where everyone has a chance to succeed.
Right, so let's get back to those 4 scenarios from the paper.
Okay.
They really lay out the choices and trade-offs involved in designing these systems.
They do. They show us the different paths we can take.
So the first scenario, scenario 1A, it imagines these like super trustworthy validators,
Okay.
individuals or entities that are so invested in the system, they would never even think about cheating.
The ideal scenario, right? Where we can practically eliminate the risk of someone going rogue.
Yeah, exactly. So in this case, both external validation, where we have these separate entities verifying transactions,
Sure.
and internal validation, where the users are also the validators,
Right.
they both lead to a centralized system with a single validator.
Interesting, right.
Yeah, I thought we were talking about decentralization.
We are, but remember those 2 big challenges we talked about earlier?
Validator incentives and double spending.
Exactly. In this perfect world scenario, those problems basically disappear.
Because our single validator is so trustworthy.
They're practically incorruptible.
And since we only need one validator, the whole system becomes super efficient.
We cut down on all that duplicated effort.
So it's like having that one incredibly reliable friend, you know, the one you trust with your life.
Yeah.
They're always there for you, and they would
Yeah.
never betray your trust. But finding someone like that for an entire financial system,
It's a tall order.
yeah, it is. So that brings us to scenario 1B, where things get a little more realistic.
Okay, so we're stepping back from utopia a bit.
We are. The validators are still focused on those long-term rewards,
Okay.
but they're not perfect angels anymore.
So there's still a chance for someone to act selfishly, but it's manageable.
Yeah, exactly. And here's where things get interesting. With external validation,
Okay.
the system still leans towards centralization, but the size of the transactions might be smaller than what's best for the economy as a whole.
Interesting.
So why would we want to limit the transaction size?
It's a way to reduce the potential gains from cheating.
Okay.
So The validator doesn't need to be paid an insane amount to stay honest.
So it's like a trade-off.
It is.
We're sacrificing some economic efficiency to keep things more secure.
Exactly.
Now, with internal validation, where the users are also the validators,
Okay.
we can actually have a decentralized system with multiple validators and still keep things relatively safe.
Because everyone has skin in the game.
Right. If I'm a user and a validator, I'm invested in making sure the whole system works smoothly.
It benefits you directly.
But let's move on to scenario 2, where the validators are a little more impatient.
Okay, so they're more focused on those immediate gains.
Yeah, they want to see results now, not later.
And that increases the risk of someone trying to game the system for a quick profit.
Oh, that sounds like trouble.
It can be, and in this scenario, the paper finds that external validation just doesn't work.
Like, we can't rely on those independent validators to keep things secure.
The temptation is too strong, they lack that long-term commitment.
But internal validation can still work.
It can, but we need to get more creative with our governance.
More creative. How so?
We need more validators, each with less power individually.
Right.
So it's harder for any single one to disrupt the system.
Spreading the power around.
Exactly. And we also move away from requiring unanimous agreement.
Nope.
We start relying on these supermajority rules, where only a certain percentage of validators need to agree.
That makes sense. With so many validators, getting everyone to agree all the time can be a nightmare.
Especially if you have technical glitches or disagreements.
And these supermajority rules, they give us some flexibility, some resilience.
They do, and the paper actually gives us a way to calculate the optimal threshold.
Like a formula for building a secure and efficient system.
It's based on those validator incentives, the size of the transactions, the number of validators, and the cost of verification.
So we can actually figure out the sweet spot.
We can, and interestingly, as the number of validators increases and the transaction sizes decrease, that optimal threshold, it tends towards a simple majority.
A simple majority. Like 51% or more.
Yeah, even though it doesn't have to be that high.
So in a very decentralized system with tons of validators and smaller transactions, you don't need everyone to agree all the time.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance.
And that brings us to the final scenario, scenario 3, where we take decentralization to the extreme.
Okay, the ultimate test.
Everyone is a validator.
True democracy in action.
Everyone has an equal say in how the ledger is run.
But this scenario, it brings its own challenges.
Of course it does.
We have a massive number of validators, each with their own motivations.
Yeah, and maybe some of them aren't as tech-savvy as others.
Right, and that raises the risk of free riding.
Free riding.
Yeah, people just going along with the crowd instead of actually doing their due diligence.
So how do you prevent that?
The paper suggests implementing a minimum stake to become a validator.
Like a membership fee.
Yeah, something to filter out those who aren't truly committed to the system.
So everyone has to have some skin in the game.
Exactly.
And in this fully distributed system, that optimal supermajority threshold, it can actually be quite low.
Even less than a simple majority in some cases.
Really? I would have thought you'd need more agreement with so many validators.
It seems counterintuitive, but requiring a super high majority in a system like this could make it really slow and clunky.
Yeah, if some validators are offline or slow to respond, things could grind to a halt.
Right, so again, it's all about striking that balance between security, efficiency, and practicality.
Go easy answers.
Not in this world. These 4 scenarios, they give us a glimpse into the challenges and possibilities of creating a truly robust and efficient DLT system.
It's about choosing the right mix of centralization and decentralization, finding the right incentives for validators, figuring out the best consensus mechanisms, and even thinking about the size of the transactions.
It's a multi-dimensional puzzle.
It is, but it's exciting to see the range of options, to think about all the different ways we can build these systems.
It's a whole new frontier of financial innovation.
We've gone from those single validator systems to ones where everyone's involved. It's mind-blowing.
It is, and it all comes back to that core idea. Aligning incentives.
Making sure everyone's working towards the same goal.
Right, creating a system that's sustainable, secure, and beneficial for everyone involved.
But let's not forget about those competing ledgers.
Oh yeah, the marketplace of the future?
The paper argues that this competition, it could actually push those ledgers towards those optimal designs we've been discussing.
The invisible hand of the market, guiding us towards efficiency and security.
So all those formulas for the ideal number of validators, those supermajority thresholds, all that stuff.
Yeah.
You're saying market forces could naturally lead systems in that direction.
Ledgers that stray too far from those optimal designs, they might become less efficient, less secure, or just less appealing to users.
So they would be at a disadvantage.
Exactly. They might not survive the competition.
So even without some central authority dictating the rules.
Yeah.
This competition could guide us towards the best systems.
It's a fascinating idea, the power of decentralized innovation.
But with all this talk about tech and markets, we can't forget about the human side of things.
You're right, we
Well,
can.
we've talked about validator incentives and efficient systems.
Yeah.
But what about the ethical implications?
That's the big question, isn't it? What kind of world do we want to build with this technology?
Do we want a system that benefits everyone, or one that concentrates power in the hands of a few?
These questions go beyond the technical details. They get to the heart of what it means to be human in a digital age.
This deep dive has been a real roller coaster.
It has.
We've covered so much ground, from the mechanics of DLT to the big questions about its role in society.
It's just the tip of the iceberg, though.
I know, right?
As DLT continues to evolve, we need to keep asking these tough questions, keep challenging our assumptions, and make sure this technology is a force for good.
And that's what the deep dive is all about. Yeah, it's like opening up this whole new world of financial tools and services.
It is.
But it also makes you wonder, like, how do we manage all this?
Right. It's not enough to just let the market do its thing.
We need some guardrails, right?
We do. We need to think carefully about the rules of the game, making sure the competition is fair and that users are protected.
So what kind of regulatory framework would even work in this world of competing ledgers? What are the big things we need to consider?
It's a tough question, and there's no easy answer.
Of course not.
One of the biggest challenges is finding that balance between, encouraging innovation and preventing those harmful practices.
Yeah, too much regulation, and you could stifle creativity, slow things down,
Right.
but too little, and you leave people vulnerable to scams, exploitation, all that bad stuff.
It's a tightrope walk, finding that sweet spot where we can promote responsible development without killing the potential of this technology.
Yeah, and we also need to think about how to make sure these different ledgers can talk to each other. Yeah.
Interoperability, it's crucial.
If they can't communicate effectively, it's like we'll end up with this fragmented system, and we won't be able to reap the full benefits of this whole ecosystem.
It's like having a bunch of different languages. If people can't understand each other, it's hard to collaborate, to trade, to build something together.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Standard-setting bodies, industry collaborations, those will be key in developing those common protocols and frameworks that allow these different systems to talk to each other.
So it's not just about building those individual ledgers.
No.
It's about building the infrastructure that connects them,
The bridges between these digital islands.
like building roads and bridges that connect different cities and towns.
Exactly, creating those pathways for value and information to flow freely.
And this brings us back to that point from the paper. Even with all this complexity, all this potential for disruption, those market forces, they could actually guide us towards those optimal designs we talked about earlier.
It's like an invisible hand, pushing the market towards efficiency and security.
So those formulas for the ideal number of validators, those supermajority thresholds, all that stuff,
Yeah.
you're saying competition could actually incentivize systems to adopt those designs.
Think about it. If a system strays too far from those ideal configurations, it might become less efficient, less secure, or just less user-friendly.
And that would put it at a disadvantage.
It would. It wouldn't be able to compete as effectively.
So those ledgers that are too centralized, they might be vulnerable to corruption, censorship, all that.
Right.
And the ones that are too decentralized, they might be slow, expensive to operate.
You might struggle to keep up.
And this competition, it could help weed out those less effective designs, push the market towards those systems that strike the right balance.
The ones that find that sweet spot between security, efficiency, and user experience.
Wow, this whole conversation has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of not just like the nuts and bolts of DLT,
Yeah.
but the huge implications it has for our economy, for society as a whole.
It's a powerful technology with the potential to reshape our world in profound ways.
It really is, and it's been a pleasure exploring all these ideas with you.
Likewise, it's been great to dive into this with you.
And as DLT keeps evolving, it's crucial to keep having these conversations, keep questioning our assumptions, and make sure this technology is used for good.
Absolutely. We can't let our guard down.
And that's what the deep dive is all about. We hope you've enjoyed this journey into the world of distributed ledger technology, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the topics that matter.